Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this event. My name is Zaina Karabatic, and I'm an Associate Director within the Office of International Student and Scholar Affairs. Today's session is part of ISSA's Info Blitz, which is a week-long kind of a week full of events that are kind of supplementary to international student orientation that we hope you all find helpful. Hopefully you've attended other events from us this week, or perhaps will attend in the rest of the week. We will solicit some feedback on those events at the end of the session. So today's particular session is about knowing your rights and safety, how to reduce risks and navigate interactions with law enforcement as a non-US citizen. And we're really excited to be partnered today with the Notre Dame Police Department with my colleague, Captain Rob Martinez, who I'll allow to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you all can see or not, but I thought I took it off. Yeah, Rob Martinez. I've been with the university 6.5 years. Prior to that, I retired with 22 years of service with the Lake County, Indiana Sheriff's Department. So that's Northwest Indiana, about 3 counties west of here. I am currently the captain of crime prevention, outreach, and safety for Notre Dame Police.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so we want to start this off with a legal disclaimer, just to confirm that we at ISSA, at NDPD, are not attorneys and that this presentation is solely for informational purposes and it is not to be construed as legal advice or legal opinions. If you need legal advice or legal opinion, we will provide resources at the end of the presentation where you can seek that information. So the things we're going to cover in today's agenda or in today's session include the different kinds of law enforcement agencies in the United States, some of the constitutional rights that you have as a non-immigrant in the United States. What's the difference between public spaces versus private spaces, and how do your interactions with law enforcement change depending on where you are? What are some tips and strategies for navigating encounters with law enforcement? What are some of the potential outcomes or consequences of interacting with law enforcement? And then, as I said at the end, we'll provide some resources for you if you do have any sort of interaction with law enforcement, if you do need some sort of legal counsel. So first of all, what are the different law enforcement agencies in the United States? So many of you have already interacted with the U.S. Department of State when you went to go apply for your visa stamp. So the U.S. Department of State they monitor all of that. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, also known as DHS, this includes Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, Customs and Border Protection, CBP. Those are the people that you see at the port of entry when you're arriving into the United States. Citizenship and Immigration Services. If any of you plan to apply for OPT, that's who you'll be applying to. Within the U.S. Department of Justice is housed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as FBI. Transportation Security Administration, the TSA. These are the people who you meet during the security checks in the airports in the United States. And then also on a more local level, your state and local police agencies.
And if I can just kind of highlight real quick what Zaina just mentioned. So the FBI would be considered a federal law enforcement agency, just like the other ones that she mentioned. When you're talking state, you're talking about in our state, it would be particularly the Indiana State Police, Indiana State Excise Police that do everything with alcohol, tobacco, those kind of things. And then your local agencies could be a city police department. It could also be something like Notre Dame Police, which were a private institution. We're a police agency for the private institution of the university. It could also be a local town, such as Roseland PD, which is just outside of campus borders here. It is unincorporated St. Joseph County, but they do have some law enforcement officials there called town marshals. And it's a smaller area that they have jurisdiction of, but that is a local agency, for example.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. So moving on to some of your constitutional rights as a non-US citizen. So generally speaking, non-US citizens have very similar rights to US citizens under the Constitution while you are within the United States. Things like the Bill of Rights, your freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of these things are guaranteed to you while you are within the United States. However, what we are going to mention now and what we will say again throughout this presentation is that you as non-US citizens have more to consider when interacting with law enforcement because of immigration laws. And so we're going to get a little bit more into that and how that is going to impact you if you do interact with law enforcement in the United States, or rather things to consider when you're assessing the risk. We also want to mention this pre-admission at the port of entry exception. So while I said that non-US citizens have similar rights as US citizens under the Constitution within the United States, while you are physically in the United States, it's important to note that at the time that you all are traveling into the United States, before Customs and Border Protection has admitted you into the country, when you're sitting at the airport, waiting to get through the security line to enter the United States, that's what we call pre-admission. And during that time period, you are not considered to be physically in the United States. And so some of the laws in terms of what they're allowed to search you for, what they're allowed to search on your electronic devices, you're not necessarily going to be protected by the constitutional rights because you're not necessarily in the United States at that point. And for that reason, actually, ISSA advises students when you're presenting documentation to the officer at the port of entry that you carry all hard copies of your documents with you. We don't advise turning over any sort of electronic device because you're essentially giving them permission to search that device. And then, as I mentioned, the consequences of breaking the law as a non-US citizen may be greater and have a more far-reaching impact because you are a non-US citizen and you have certain things like immigration laws to consider. And we're going to unpack that a little bit further throughout the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Captain Rob, who's going to tell us a little bit about encountering law enforcement in public settings.
So thanks, Anna. So just first and foremost, I just wanted to just explain for those that are maybe new to the country or just visiting for the first time and you're studying here and working here. Law enforcement in this country, our first and foremost priority, especially Notre Dame police on this campus and nationwide, is basically we're a safety agency, right? Everyone's safety is paramount. That's our number one priority. That's our product, basically, is keeping everyone safe. Whether you're on campus or you're even off campus, that's our goal here. There are times, and unfortunately, you see that in news media, and you see that nationwide and worldwide too, as well, negative events that impact our profession from people that basically use and abuse their authority. And that is basically, I'd say, those are very rare, but they do happen, circumstances. What I can tell you is that most of the people that are in our profession, we get up every morning and we just want to make sure that everybody's safe that we encounter and that we're able to go home at night. That's basically what our job is, and we want to stay safe too as well. We want to keep the public safe. So when you're talking about law enforcement, say for example Notre Dame on our campus and what we do, we want you to come to us if you need help. Right? We are approachable. I can tell you that Notre Dame police do a lot of things that most municipal agencies, and those are your federal, your state, your local agencies, we do things a little differently here. We really go out of our way to make sure that people are helped and they get the help that they need, and that we maintain that security safety here. We strive to create that culture of safety on Notre Dame's campuses or Notre Dame's main campus here, and we try to do that even with our international gateways. We want to make sure that people are safe so that they can be productive and study, learn, and work. Right. So when you're dealing with somebody in a public setting, when you're encountering law enforcement in a public setting, we're talking, generally speaking, a place where people are invited to. That could be a public park. It could be a store. It could be a shopping mall, a center. It could be a theater. Those type of things, a sporting venue, right? Those are considered public places where there's not really that expectation of privacy here, right? When you're dealing with law enforcement, you always have these rights here, and that is what you're seeing here on the screen. You have the right to remain silent. You can refuse to answer questions without an attorney present. You can also refuse to give any kind of information about your status, your any type of background that you have, your immigration status, your background, your criminal history. You can refuse any type of searches, on your bag, your person, even the electronic devices, as Zaina mentioned earlier. You can always ask if you're free to leave, and you have a right not to sign anything. I will go over a couple things. Usually, and we talk about this in law enforcement, The really time that you invoke your rights, you have a right to invoke that any time. But really, police are not allowed to take you into custody or detain you unless there's probable cause, or we have some type of belief or something is showing us that there may be some criminal activity afoot, right? If we can't articulately say that on why we're doing this, or stopping you or wanting to talk with you, you really have that right to leave the scene, to leave the area, right? I will tell you, as a Notre Dame student, you have a Notre Dame ID while you're here. Any Notre Dame law enforcement officer that asks you for your Notre Dame ID, you are required to provide that, just because of the fact that you are with the university here. We also specifically for the university here. If you're off campus and you're encountering another agency such as South Bend Police, St. Joe County Police, Mishawaka, typically you're going to want to provide them some type of a document that shows that you're affiliated with the university, because that will help them decide, maybe we need to contact the Notre Dame Police Department and let the campus deal with any kind of issues that you encounter in your daily, outings. What I can tell you though too is you're not technically in custody or detained unless there's some physical detainment where we're telling you you cannot leave. You're not free to leave. It could be physical, where maybe there's handcuffs placed on you, or we're just telling you physically you're not free to leave, and that there's some questioning. Technically, you're not detained unless there's that, and you don't really, your rights being invoked really don't apply if there's not both of those things present. If we're just detaining you because we're trying to find out what, maybe you're a witness to something, maybe you had some involvement here, or you have something to add to some information we're trying, as long as we're not detaining you, you don't really have to say, hey, I don't want to talk to you or anything. We're just trying to get to the bottom of an issue. But if there again is detainment and questioning, then that's when you're able to apply your rights to say that I don't want to talk any further. And typically, because of the 1963 Geneva Convention, and she mentioned her a little earlier about rights that you're enabled, especially the U.S. Constitution. There are 56 countries currently that have agreements through the consulate of your country or where you're from, where we have to notify those consulate authorities or agencies if you're being detained for any type of questioning. Likewise, if you know those rights too as well, you can invoke that and say, you know what, I'm not comfortable speaking with you. I don't want to participate. I don't want to give you any more information. I would like you to contact my consulate authority. So you have those rights there too. I will tell you, likewise too, in a public setting, obviously you don't really have that expectation of privacy. So be aware of that.
Captain Rob, can you just explain what it means to be detained?
Yeah, so that would be any time that we come upon a situation and you happen to be there, and we believe that maybe you have some information that could help us, whether it's some type of maybe there's an accident, maybe there's an injury, maybe we were called to a situation. If you don't have any involvement, that's fine. You can state that to us. But if we believe that maybe you might be a witness, we're going to want to ask you some identifying questions. If you're not involved, you have every right. And even if you are involved, you don't have a right. You have a right to not cooperate or to not answer questions being asked of you. But if we believe that there is some type of a crime that has happened, whether you are not involved or not, or if you're a witness, perhaps, we would like to get a little bit more information, some personal identifying information to you. Typically, and generally speaking, an officer will explain to you why the reasoning for asking you certain questions is. You still have a right to not cooperate and participate, but obviously, if you don't have anything to do with the situation, maybe you witness something, that little bit of information might help us out in solving a crime. It might help us to further an investigation. It might be something, it could be nothing, but at least we took the time to try to ask you to try to ascertain some information. So if you're told that you're not being released, or you're not free to leave, then that is getting into a legal area where we have to explain to you what we're looking for, why we're asking you these questions. If you're not comfortable at that point, you can refuse to answer questions. You can walk away unless we have some probable cause to say that we believe that you've been a part of a crime. Then it changes things where we actually can physically detain you. And again, like I mentioned, it could be telling you not to leave. It could be that we're conducting an investigation and we believe you might have some information for us. And it could lead up to actual physical detainment where we're actually placing handcuffs on you. Most times people think that it's because you're under arrest. That could be because of officer safety issues. We don't know you, you don't know us. We're trying to figure out and try to make sure that the situation is safe. But again, you do have those rights where you can refuse to cooperate if you feel that way. And you can always ask for a supervisor or police officers or a staff supervisor to come out and try to further explain the situation.
Great, thank you. And I do just want to point out that we put on this slide here on the right side kind of examples of, places or events where you might interact with law enforcement in public areas, things like protests, rallies, marches that happen in city streets and public parks, as Captain Rob mentioned. And we saw a lot of this happening in recent years in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so that's when, we thought it would be really helpful to kind of remind our international student community that you may choose to participate in something like this, but do keep in mind that if you're going with a friend and your friend is a US citizen, that if you all are involved with the police, if there is some sort of law enforcement interaction, once again, that those ramifications may just be bigger for you and more impactful for you and your immigration status as an international student, as opposed to your friend who may be a US citizen.
And just if I can add something about the protests or any kind of demonstrations, a couple of different things. If you're doing this off of Notre Dame's property, Notre Dame campus, obviously there are other agencies that you're probably going to deal with. And again, most agencies, law enforcement or safety, emergency services personnel would be there to monitor things to make sure that things are safe, done in a safe manner. With Notre Dame's campus, any protests or demonstrations typically there is an expectation that they are basically they have to advise and notify the campus safety and university operations division to let them know of a planned protest or demonstration. There are times, such as in dorms or maybe depending on type of issue that's happening on campus, where students may do some type of a quiet protest, like a sit-in. Typically, if it's unannounced and not cleared with campus, the University of Operations, Campus Safety Division, there could be law enforcement that are called here, the Notre Dame Police specifically, and then if we know they're students, student affairs can become involved too as well. And typically the procedure is that the police will ask you all to disperse because of the fact that it wasn't a pre-advised demonstration. Notre Dame is pretty good about granting those protests or demonstrations or a sit-in if they're notified ahead of time, just so that we can make sure that things are in place to make sure that people are safe. So I just kind of wanted to add that too, just in case somebody has questions about participation in those things.
Yeah, wonderful. And I should have mentioned earlier, but if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature of the Zoom meeting, and we'll be sure to get to them perhaps throughout the presentation or absolutely by the end of it. So now moving on to private settings, Captain Rob.
Yeah, private settings. Now we talked about publics where there's where public are free to move about and they're invited. Private settings is basically where you have that expectation of privacy. It could be, for example, a public restroom, right? You may be in a public setting, but once you go behind that door and you're doing what you have to do, there is an expectation that you are not going to be watched or followed, right? There's an expectation there. Likewise, your home, your apartment where you're living and where you're paying rent or you own, a garage that's attached to your property where you have those kind of expectations of privacy, and law enforcement can't go there to say, hey, we'd like to take a look in there without having typically a warrant that has been brought before some type of a magistrate or a judge because of some potential criminal violation that police want to investigate, right? Basically your rights apply here. You can refuse entry. A law enforcement official can't just come up and say, they have the right to ask you, would you allow me to search this? But you always retain that right to say no. Do you have some type of a warrant, a document, right? Again, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer any questions. We need that warrant to search your home, car, or your phone, or your property, your bag, any kind of property that you have on you. And you have a right to actually see the document. You also have a right to retain or obtain a receipt if the paperwork is legitimate and has been signed by a magistrate. You are allowed a copy of that. If anything is removed or detained, like physical documents or any type of physical property, you have a right to know what has been taken, right? At the bottom of this, it says, do not sign anything. You have a right not to sign anything. And I'll explain in another one where we talk about like a traffic stop. But again, these are things where you have that expectation that no one has access to, right? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about private settings.
Great. So now moving on to alcohol and marijuana use. Captain Rob, did you want to start us off?
Oh, yeah, I can do that. Just a couple things here, just in the United States, specifically in Indiana. Our law here in Indiana is you have to be 21 years of age or older to imbibe in an alcoholic, enjoy an alcoholic beverage. Typically, you need some type of official ID. Usually, it's a state ID. You may be able to use a passport or a national ID if you have that with you, but it varies on the establishment. Some establishments, whether it's a restaurant that serves alcohol or it's a bar, which main source of income is serving alcoholic beverages, they retain the right to use whatever ID that you're showing them. If you're 21 of age and older, they can accept it or not accept it. And if that's the case, you'll just have to not, you wouldn't stay there. Also, regarding there are also other laws regarding the contributing to the delinquency of minors. So, if you're 21 years of age, specifically in the state of Indiana, and most states too, but Indiana specifically, if you're over 21 and you're able to purchase or alcohol, if you furnish that to somebody who's 20 years of age and under, so under 21 years of age, there are state statutes and laws that can be violated because you're furnishing that to somebody who's not of legally drinking age in the state of Indiana. So that is something that could basically kind of follow you through your, your status here in our country, because it is technically it's a minor infraction, but it's still against the law in the state of Indiana. Likewise, marijuana specifically, or any type of like scheduled narcotics, any type of like a serious drug that's not prescribed by a doctor, typically like a medical prescription, those are not, that is illegal in the state of Indiana. Yes, it may be federally decriminalized in certain areas, certain states like Michigan, which is it's legal there, but in Indiana it's not. And we deal with this a lot of times, not only Notre Dame Police, but other agencies locally here. You may have somebody who is able to use marijuana, which is legalized in Michigan, but they're transporting, they're maybe bringing people into the state of Indiana. They're just traveling through Indiana, and they get encountered by, on a traffic stop, or police come into contact with them. And the police are saying, it's illegal in the state of Indiana. And we have a lot of people that forget that. So you cannot have it in your possession in Indiana. You can't have it in your vehicle in Indiana, even if you're traveling back and forth. That ignorance is no excuse of the law violation there. So you have to be careful. Again, if you're in a state that it's legalized and you're of age, that it's going to be on a state by state basis, basically.
Yeah, great. And just a note regarding alcohol and events with those under 21, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the one buying the alcohol for them. It could merely be that you go to a party, and at this party, there are people under the age of 21 present, and you all are consuming alcohol. This could be something that could create a problem if, police are called, and there's law enforcement at the event. So kind of keep that in mind. There is a risk associated with that.
I'm sorry, Zaina.
No, please go
I
ahead.
was just going to add that we do deal with some situations too with off-campus parties, and that could be maybe a grad student who's living off campus. It could be a senior who's here studying that is allowed to live off campus. We've had in the last couple of weeks, we've had issues with some off-campus parties that had alcohol there. People at the party, the people that were hosting it, were 21 years of age and older, but there were people that were under 21 years of age that were allowed to enter the residence or on the property, the backyard, the front lawn of a private residence, yes, but loud music, disruptions to the neighborhood caused the attention of the neighbors to contact the police, local agencies, and they responded there and had to deal with situations there. So it does happen.
And Captain Ron, can you explain the difference between illegal versus decriminalized?
Yeah, so basically, illegal just means that it's not allowed. There's no there's no exceptions, right? Decriminalize would mean that, yes, in certain areas, it could be a certain state, it could be a certain local area where it may be illegal in other places, but in this area it's decriminalized, meaning that you may not be facing any kind of fines or any type of incarceration because of that.
Great, thank you. And I do just want to point out, for those of you who may not know, that marijuana isn't always called marijuana, and there are other names for it, just so that you know when someone is saying this, what they're talking about. Cannabis, weed, pot, Mary Jane, MJ, all of these things referring to the same drug. So moving on to interactions with law enforcement while driving.
Okay, so this is the one example I was going to explain to you about, just where your rights, so you have the rights to, refuse to cooperate. When you're in a traffic stop, if you're driving, if you have a driver's license, you're able to drive in this country, or even if you're in a vehicle where somebody is legally driving, and maybe there's some type of a police officer that conducts a traffic stop, and that's typically going to be the red lights, and the red and blue lights are going to be turned on. There may be a siren just to kind of get your to notify you, to get you to notice them. The driver of those vehicles is required to stop. We have to have probable cause to believe that some type of a traffic or state violation has occurred for us to do that. Police we are not allowed to randomly just pull anybody over. We have to have some type of probable cause to show that there is some infraction or some violation, a motor vehicle violation. And so if we do that, you typically are required to pull over to the side of the road. If it's at nighttime, we encourage people to, if you want to park in a certain well-lit area, that's the best thing to do. Some people will not stop and pull over unless they get to a well-lit area. That's kind of basically it. I just noticed a question. I think we can get to that right after this slide, but the driver and passengers do have a right to not speak to the officers. However, in Indiana, we typically will ask you for your driver's license and registration. Typically, you're required by state law to at least provide, the insurance or papers that show who's the owner of the car. Just letting you know that if you refuse to cooperate from that standpoint, that kind of changes the officer's response or actions at that point. Because first and foremost, if it was me in the situation, I would first be a little bit more alerted and aware that, is there something not legitimate here? Is there something maybe where there's a licensing violation, or maybe the car is not owned by the person driving it? Those would be reasons why somebody might not participate or cooperate with an officer. What I tell everybody as an officer is follow the instructions from the officer, because again, we're trying to enforce the laws or any kind of traffic violations or any kind of traffic enforcement in the state of Indiana, right? Typically, you're required by Indiana law to have a license with you, a valid license, and also proof of ownership, proof of insurance, so registration for the vehicle. If you happen to be in that vehicle where somebody else is driving, and you're not the owner of the vehicle, that driver should cooperate with them. You do not have to answer any questions. But again, if there's some other kind of potential violation that the officer feels, they may continue the questioning there for a longer period of time. Obviously, it might inconvenience you, but if there's some type of, I don't want to say foul play, but if there's some type of a suspicious kind of thing going on, and I'm talking about where the officer can articulately say that, well, I pulled over, they were not cooperating at all, this is a danger, high crime area, we're trying to make sure that, the violations, we're cracking down on whether it's seatbelts, which is safety for the drivers, or excessive speed, obviously, because we're trying to avoid accidents. Those are things that we want to, our job is, we're tasked with doing, right? Enforcement. Some of the things that we would advise you are the risk reducing tips, and that's to have the driver at least roll down the window partially. You'll see a lot of videos in the media and in TV where a person refuses to lower their window. I can tell you, because of dangers that happen both to people on traffic stops, people that are in the vehicles, and also officers and officer safety too, that kind of heightens awareness for officers that there may be something criminal afoot. So you've got to be careful about when you selectively decide, well, we're not going to cooperate, we're not going to talk to the officer. If it's a traffic violation, it's just that, right? Nothing more. And the officer should be able to explain to you, you have a right to know what the officer is investigating. What we say is to cooperate with the officer, be respectful with the officer, Likewise, the officers should be respectful to you, right? They should not be degrading you. They should not be using profanity, those kind of things. We want you to make sure you keep your hands visible to the officer. In our line of work, hands injure us, hands kill, right? That's what officers look for. If you are not showing your hands, we might get a little bit more alerted to that. There may be a weapon involved. There may be something not right here. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to go home at the end of our shift, right? So that kind of heightens officers' safety awareness. So if you can, easy thing to do is to put your hands maybe on the steering wheel, keep them there, and let the officer know that, hey, if you have to reach for something, you want to get the documents, just let the officer know that. Articulate to the officer that I'm going to grab my license, it's in my right hip, and the officer will usually allow you to do that. Try to show them the documents that they're asking. You don't have to give them anything else other than what they're required. You asking you, a license, a registration, proof of ownership, or insurance for the vehicle. You may be asked to exit the vehicle. Now, that is only going to be done typically when an officer has some probable cause that maybe there's something in the car it's illegal. There may be such as drugs or alcohol, those kind of things, right? It's illegal to have typically in certain areas. I know South Bend for sure off campus, an open container of alcohol. So that would be an alcoholic beverage, whether it's a cup, a bottle with the cap off that's not secured. That is illegal around here. They're local ordinance violations, subject to like a ticket or a fine type recourse there or action. So you just need to make sure that if you're in a vehicle like that, you need to make sure that those are not open containers. Even if they're 21, you cannot drive like that. If you're asked to exit the vehicle, you have a right to ask why. The officers should be able to articulate to you why they're asking you that. We talked about if you're potentially detained or arrested. Again, your rights to invoke your rights typically kick in when you're detained physically. You can't move, or your freedom of movement, or the officers told you that you're not free to leave because they're investigating. They have more questions for you. If you're told that and there's questioning being followed, you have a right at that point to say, I would like an attorney. I'd like you to contact my consulate because this is going a little bit further than just a typical information gathering, right? You have the right to remain silent, as we mentioned earlier. You have the right to an attorney, to consult with one. If you cannot afford an attorney, you don't have one can be appointed to you in court. And this is typically if you're going to have some kind of incarceration or arrest. We're probably not at that point on a typical traffic stop, right? But again, you don't have to sign anything. I will tell you, if you're the driver or you're in the vehicle, the driver that's issued a citation, that's given a ticket, some type of traffic violation, you have a right to refuse to sign that ticket. But I will tell you, typically, a person being asked to sign a ticket or an infraction, like a ticket violation, or even if it's just a warning, they'll issue a paper notice to say that on this date and time, I stopped this car because of this reason. This is the person. This is the registration. Everything was confirmed that it was belonging to the person. If that happens, what your signature is basically doing, it's not an admission of guilt at all. It is basically a promissory note that you're going to return to a court in front of a magistrate or a judge at a later date. So don't be put off by that if you're required to sign some type of an infraction ticket or a warning. That is just accountability for the officer and for the court, and for you to show up at a later time to answer as to why you received this citation.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep. Mhm.
So instead of do not sign anything, rather read whatever it is if you
Yeah,
do
you have a
and
right to
sign it.
read that and have it explained to you too. If you're confused or you're concerned about it, have the officer articulately tell you what the reason for signing. And if you're comfortable signing it, you may do that. Typically, if you refuse to sign it for whatever reason, the officer will probably note refuse to sign, and they're still going to issue the ticket. Just accept it. You can always contest. You can always question it and contest it. What we tell people to do is it's better for you to deal with the situation, have the ticket issued to you, and then you have a right to contest that and show up to court. A lot of times people don't do that, and that's how they get fined. If you're able to go to court and explain your side of the story, typically some officers don't show up to court because they don't have the time, they're busy, they forget, and your ticket or your infraction, your violation could be dismissed too by a judge just because you actually showed up to contest it.
Yeah, great. And I do want to mention one thing, which is that on the ISSA webpage, we have a webpage fully dedicated to driving in the United States. For those of you who maybe don't already have a driver's license or have bought a car, but maybe plan to throughout your time here at Notre Dame, we have information about how to access the BMV, how to get a license, things to consider when you're buying a car, how to, get car insurance, all of those things, which may be helpful. We also had a driving in the US recording that we'll be posting that we hosted as part of the Info Blitz. So that may be a good resource as well. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that, all of these things that Captain Rob has been talking about here, it's a lot of information, but we want you to have it because in the moment, you're not going to be thinking about, kind of all of the, oh yes, thank you. My colleague Elaine just put the link in she's going to put it in the chat to everyone. You may not know what to do in the moment. And so some of this is really, it's not to scare you, it's really just to prepare you and to kind of get you thinking about, if you are in this situation, what would you have to do? And what are the things that you should keep in mind? You may not be trying to look suspicious if you're not showing your hands. But as Captain Rob mentioned, it's important as a safety measure for both yourself and the officer that you're interacting with. Captain Rob, I do have a follow-up question for you because I know this came up last year. I think it's a good question. If one of our international students is a passenger in a car, but not the driver, what is their responsibility and their obligation if that driver and that vehicle are pulled over?
Yeah, typically, we would like you to comply and answer questions that we can identify who you are. If there is something that's further happening with the driver, you're not involved with what the officer is talking about, you can leave and walk away from the car. Now, the officer is going to want to know, why is this person walking away? Why they're not cooperating with me? Again, where they're trying to figure out and fact gather, depending on what the situation is. But you do have those rights to question. Again, not argue, but you can question about it. You can always contest it at a later time. What we are hoping is that we're able to identify everybody. And if nothing is, there's nothing criminal afoot, again, we're not going to just stop you because we think that there's something going on. We have to be able to articulate why we stopped you, why we're questioning you, and so on. So you do have a right to not answer any questions again. And being the fact that you're an international student, if there is, that is not a situation where you would say, I want to speak to my consulate, but if there is something where you're going to be physically detained and there's some type of custody being taken place where you're not allowed to leave, that's when you can go ahead and invoke those rights.
Yeah, great. And we're going to go over kind of the escalation of potential consequences of interaction with law enforcement in just a minute here.
Yeah, there was a question. Can I go back? There's a question from the last slide. I think it was about alcohol that was in the chat. And it was, can I be 21 of age and over and walk around publicly with an alcoholic beverage? So I will tell you this. Typically, no, because that's considered possession of alcohol. Also, a public intoxication. There could be some intoxication if you've been drinking alcoholic beverages. The alcohol in your blood content, the vapor or the alcohol content in your blood could obviously have you intoxicated. In the state of Indiana, typically 0.05 blood alcohol content is enough to show impairment for a pedestrian, somebody walking. 0.08 blood alcohol content would be for somebody who's driving. You're not allowed to have an alcohol content over 0.08. On game day, when football is happening on campus, this is kind of like a contradictory thing, but I've got to explain it to everybody. On game day, we allow alcohol on campus. We allow the public that comes here onto campus for the events. There's something called tailgating, where it's basically a gathering of friends. It's like a party, a pre-party before people go in to watch the football games. There are also some people that technically they're supposed to go into the game or leave, but if they're behaving, they're quiet, they're not drawing a lot of attention to them. It's not a rowdy, people in the public aren't complaining about the noise, if there's music or anything like that. They're allowed to kind of sit in the parking lot as long as they're talking at a reasonable level. They can drink alcoholic beverages. We do allow that on game day Saturdays. So it's contradictory to what we do typically during the week, where alcohol is not allowed on campus unless you're an adult, 21 or over, And for the dorms, such as seniors who may be 21 years of age, typically they're allowed what's considered a case of beer. Although we know that's typically not what we find in the buildings. The building services crews that have to clean up, there are typically other types of alcohol, including hard alcohol, such as, like could be like vodka, some type of a harder alcohol content that has a heavier alcohol content. But again, just so we're clear, if you're walking on campus with an alcoholic beverage, you're probably going to get notified. The police are going to come and get involved because somebody's going to report that. You cannot do that. On game day, there's an exception. We don't stop people for walking around with an open alcohol beverage container. If you're off campus in the city of South Bend or unincorporated St. Joe County, there are rules, as I mentioned, what's called open container. If you're in a car and there's an alcoholic beverage that doesn't have a cap on it, or it's a bottle or a jar or a cup, those are considered open containers. And on a traffic stop, if there's a legal reason why a police officer is stopping you, and that is viewed in the car, they have a reason to detain you further to ascertain whether or not you're impaired. Likewise, if you're walking off campus with an alcoholic beverage, that is considered an open container, not in a vehicle, but it's on your person. And there could be people calling to report that there may be possibly an intoxicated person. So I know that's a lot there to unpack. But again, it's just answering the question about walking in public with an open alcoholic beverage. Off campus, no. On campus, on game day Saturdays, that's allowed. But other times during your stay here on campus, not allowed.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have one other question asking, in a certain situation, do I have the right to ask for an official interpreter before I sign anything?
Yes, you actually do. Now, whether or not there is somebody available to assist, Notre Dame has a list. The Notre Dame Police Department has a list of people in different that speak different languages that can assist us in situations. You do have that right to do that. If anything, we may be able to have somebody come to the scene there. If not, we may be able to get you to our station and talk with you here in the lobby here and kind of figure out the situation. But you do have a right to request those.
Great, thank you. All right. So a lot of you may see, on social media, people recording police, law enforcement interactions. So what about social media and recording? Can you take a video recording of an interaction with law enforcement?
Yeah, there's a couple things here. So you typically, generally speaking, you have a right to record, right? Especially in a public area. There's typically not an expectation of privacy. This goes for anybody in public, but it also goes where you're seeing law enforcement interacting with people. I will tell you, so we'll go through what's here, but I've got a little caveat to some of the things here I'm going to tell you. So you're allowed to take pictures or film, even video, right? Couple things. You want to make sure that you're safe, right? If it's some type of a criminal situation where there's police coming to a scene, you can video that, you can film that, you can take pictures, but hopefully you're away from the scene, right? You don't need to put yourself in any danger. If it's a traffic accident, those kind of things, you need to make sure that you're safe, right? First and foremost. So you make sure you're staying away from a distance because you don't know what the issue there is if there's a physical accident there. One of the things that there's an expectation is that you're not going to interfere with police activity. Right. So if an officer, whether it's a criminal situation where they're affecting an arrest or they're investigating a situation, whether it's it could be a bodily injury accident, it could be a criminal arrest, it could be they were just called to a gas station to investigate, maybe a theft, it could be a crime. You can film, you can take pictures and do that. But once you start approaching the officer physically, that's when a couple things can happen. A police officer may feel that you're a threat to their safety and tell you to stay away. They may tell you that you can film, but you have to stay away from them. You are in the state of Indiana, because of a new law, required to stay back at least 25 feet. This happened this last year. The law was passed. And it's basically for officer safety to not escalate a situation because obviously crime is everywhere. There's really not a lot of places that are immune from crime happening. We're no stranger to crime in this area, right? Notre Dame police do what we can to make sure things are safe on campus, but just stepping off campus, you deal with South Bend, you deal with Mishawaka. They have issues there, St. Joe County. A lot of agencies deal with crime on a daily basis, right? Some things a little bit more serious than others. But you need to, because of this new law in the state of Indiana, once an officer tells you you need to stay back, by law, it's a misdemeanor offense. So serious crimes in the state of Indiana are felony. crimes, right? Those are punishable by fines, heavy fines, multiple years in jail. But those are more egregious things like, murder, arson, carjacking, something where there's, a weapon used in an offense, right? Misdemeanors are lesser, like it could be a theft. It could be a small petty crime, like somebody's taking something from a gas station cooler because they're thirsty and they don't have the money to pay. Those could be misdemeanor crimes. Then there's infractions, which we were talking about in the traffic part. If there's a moving violation with the traffic or some type of infraction, a public ticket, right, a warning. Those could be potentially just like you have to show up to court, explain yourself, your actions to a judge. Maybe there's a fine involved there too, depending on what they determine. But with this new law in the state of Indiana, you have to stay back 25 feet if asked by a police officer to do that, because they're concerned about your safety, their safety, and what the situation that they're dealing with. Be cognizant of who and what you're filming, right? If there's a criminal situation going on and you decide to interject yourself by filming, you may feel that what you're doing is protecting the rights of the person that's getting arrested, or what have you, that you feel that you're being a good citizen here and that you have a right to film this. But if it's a dangerous situation where the person may be armed with a weapon, you are now potentially jeopardizing your safety. And that's why we talk about make sure that you're safe, right? Don't try to hide what you're doing. You don't have to tell somebody that you're filming. The police do not have a right to take your video or confiscate your phone or anything because of a situation going on. They have to have a warrant to do so. We talked about that earlier. They have to be able to go in front of a judge and explain why they want access to your camera or your recording devices. It could be a cell phone. It could be just a regular digital camera. It could be a camera, an older model with film in it, right? Law enforcement do not have a right to do that. They have to articulately they have to get a warrant to be able to physically take custody and view your things. They cannot take your information and delete anything that you've recorded. Again, this rule of the 25 feet was put in because of danger to officers, including the public as well. Just make sure if you're doing this, you do it in a safe manner and do not interfere with a lawful arrest. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So now, kind of as and Cap's Rob's done a great job of kind of mentioning these potential outcomes throughout the presentation, but more explicitly, we want to talk about what are the potential outcomes of interacting with law enforcement.
Yeah, if it's just a general, we're passing by in the street and we see you, or we're on campus and we're saying hi to you, say hi to us back, right? If there's something that we're called to investigate, because it may be a suspicious incident. Now, Notre Dame Police, we take very good care when somebody calls our dispatch center and says, "Hey, there's somebody suspicious on campus." We don't just say, and that could be because of the color of their skin, what they're wearing, anything like that. We don't immediately send somebody. Our dispatchers have a list of protocol questions via the state of Indiana and also federally mandated questions that they have to ascertain a little bit more information than just that. Who are you? Are you okay? Is everything safe? What are you seeing? Can you describe to me what activity you're seeing? Oh, well, this person is standing around pacing back and forth in front of a building. Oh, okay. So we want to ascertain, is this person maybe meeting somebody and they haven't met their appointment yet? Do they maybe it's something more serious? Do they have some type of a crisis that they're going through right now and they're looking for help? They're just not articulately asking for help. We are going to ask those actual protocol questions that we're mandated to get the best information before an officer comes out to a situation. Once we obtain that information, and it could be including asking somebody for their name and a contact number so we can call them back in case there's a question we need to ask as a follow-up, right? We're going to encourage the caller to stay on the line so we can find out until maybe an officer gets there to make sure that the scene is safe, right? If you can contribute information and help us ascertain better, that we're going to have a better response. So the better information you give us, the better response we're going to have. Maybe somebody's injured themselves. Maybe they stepped off the curb in the street. Maybe they broke their ankle, they twisted their knee, those kind of things. Then an officer is most likely going to come to assess the situation, but we're going to have Notre Dame Fire. We might even have a medical ambulance come because we need more medical personnel, right? Likewise, if we get on a scene and we're talking to you and somehow maybe it's a traffic stop and you're warned, I could say, I'm just verbally warning you, you can't do that. Oh, okay. All right. That's our interaction. That's it. there's no crime committed. Just, need to be careful next time. Try not to do this situation and be in this situation again. It could be a written warning where we take a piece of paper and we write something that says, on this day and time on a traffic stop, we found this person didn't have a seatbelt on. It's a warning, no fine or anything. Go on your way. That's it. Try next time if you're driving in the vehicle, make sure you have your seatbelt on because it's the law. It could be a ticket. If there is a moving violation that happens and we cite you and we give you a ticket, that is potentially where you're going to be required to sign that promissory note that you're going to go to court at a later time you can contest it or you can admit that it happened, right? You can pay a fine, right? So that's what a ticket or citation is. The arrest comes when we have probable cause. We have a lot of information that is supporting the fact that a crime has happened, right? According against the state of Indiana law. That's where that notification, that mandatory notification comes in. Again, I think it's, what did I say, 56 countries currently right now. I think it changed. There were 2 that were removed. So 56 now currently. That have this consular notification where you can request to speak to somebody before anything else happens, before any other questioning can happen. Likewise, an officer such as myself, if we're on Notre Dame's campus dealing with international students attending here and working here, we should know these things and we can be reminded and say, you were supposed to contact my consulate. At that point, we have to stop all questioning. We have to follow that because those are the agreements that we have.
Yeah, great. And with the mandatory consular notification, I think it's the 56 countries that have like a reciprocity agreement with the United States.
Yes.
But they can request to have their consulate notified regardless of their country of citizenship.
Absolutely, right. It's not just on the detainment. It can be anytime, right?
Great, wonderful. If a student is wondering if their interaction with law enforcement, if it was just a warning or if there was some sort of citation and they're not sure, is there a suggestion that you have in terms of verifying that?
Yeah, if it's for us, you can always ask to speak to a supervisor of the officer that you're dealing with. In my case, I'm a captain. I am a supervisor here. So for me, my next person would be one of our police chiefs, right? Because they're over me. A person who's on the patrol, their person would be like the supervisor, a sergeant or a lieutenant. The lieutenant would be the next step up, would be a captain, the patrol captain. So you could always ask to have it explained to you, especially if you're confused, you don't understand. You always also, for our department or any other agency, you can always go to the actual department location and ask to speak to a supervisor or somebody who can explain it thoroughly to you, or we have more time to sit with you maybe in an office and talk to you about the situation. We can pull records. If you have a copy of what you were given, you can bring that too. If you've misplaced or lost it, there should be a way to get that copy of the paperwork that you were given as well. You always have a right to question.
Great, thank you. All right, so in terms of all of these things, if you are ultimately arrested, you're involved in something with law enforcement and you are detained, you're arrested by a police officer. As I've mentioned a few times thus far, this has kind of further reaching impact for you all as international students, because not just are you involved with kind of the act itself, or rather being arrested, that arrest could also have a lasting impact on your current immigration status. There is a risk if you're arrested that once notified, the US government will revoke your visa. And what that means is that your current F1 or J1 visa stamp in your passport would be, it could be, not that it absolutely would be, but it could be canceled. It doesn't mean that you have to automatically leave the US. What that means is that the next time that you leave the US, you would need to get the visa renewed before you'd be able to re-enter the US. Unfortunately, there may be a delay in when you're able to find out about this. For example, you may not know until the next time that you travel. If you're arrested and you're involved in an interaction with law enforcement and you're worried about it, I would advise that you come talk to one of the advisors at ISSA about the interaction so that we can get more information and try to advise you on best next steps. This could also impact your ability to get a US visa in the future, not just in the F1 or J1 student visa category, but even beyond that, if you have other aspirations of coming to the US in a different visa status in the future. So again, a lot of times maybe you're taking an action, or you're drinking alcohol and then you're going to drive and you think it's going to be this really short-term thing. But we like to remind you that what you're doing, particularly as an international student, can have these really bigger and long-term impacts on you and your immigration status, and the future of your ability to have an immigration status in the United States. Depending on the severity of what it is that you're involved with, there could be university involvement. So a lot of times this could be something like a behavioral issue because of a crime. If you are dismissed from your Notre Dame program, this also is going to impact your ability to maintain your status. You're not going to be able to maintain your student status, immigration status, if you're not able to continue being an active student with the university. So again, if you are involved in something that impacts your ability to continue in your Notre Dame program, we would advise that you come talk to us as soon as possible so that we can advise you on next steps, on what your options are from an immigration perspective. There are many government forms that ask you about your previous arrests. So again, as I mentioned, may not be something that impacts you right here and now, but it could be something that impacts you 5 years down the road when you're filling out a government application. If it asks you about your previous arrests, you should never give false information. You should never lie about it. If you're filling out a form and it asks if you've been arrested, you will need to indicate that you have, if you have been arrested. So just a reminder to take caution. And then a second reminder to never give false information, never lie about that.
I wanted to add something to that too. When you talked about the university involvement, a lot of we try to remember to remind people that if you're living off campus, which a lot of international students do, especially if you're an upperclassman or a grad student, you're still subject to, even though you're living off campus, you're still subject to student conduct rules through the Duloc Student Handbook because you are a Notre Dame student. So a lot of time people think that, well, it doesn't apply to me because I'm not on campus. That's not the case. So I just want to make sure that you're mindful of that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great reminder. And I guess I would take that even further. And while we're obviously talking about law enforcement interaction here in the United States, if you are on a trip, you're doing field work abroad, you are on a study abroad trip, and you're involved in some sort of, behavioral issue abroad, that may also impact your ability to continue to be a Notre Dame student. That may also have some long-lasting impact. So again, just these things to think about. And if you have particular questions or you're involved in something and you're worried, definitely feel free to reach out to us. So just a few things when we talk about invoking your rights. How do you tell an officer kind of that you do not want to be searched, that you are not going to cooperate without an attorney present? Again, this seems kind of super straightforward, but I think it's helpful to give you all some scripts to have. If you're in a situation, you may not know what to say in the moment. You may be nervous. You're not sure what to say, what you're allowed to say, what you shouldn't say. And so this particular slide is really just to give you some suggestions depending on the particular situation. Saying something like, I do not want to talk to you. I choose to remain silent. Am I free to leave? If you're not sure if you're being detained, you can ask, or am I free to leave? If you are at home and somebody is trying to search your home, an officer is trying to search your home and they do not have a warrant, you can say, I do not give you permission to enter my home. I do not want to answer any questions without an attorney present. I do not give you permission to search me. Again, I realize that this is a little bit basic, but it's good to have these scripts in mind if you're ever in the situation when you're going to need to use them. And of course, as Captain Rob has noted, there are situations in which you will need to comply. And there are others when you're allowed to question. And you can always request to have an attorney present. Again, just things to kind of keep in the back of your mind in case you're ever in this sort of situation.
Just regarding the I do not give permission to enter my home, I know we talked about that earlier. Zaina just mentioned it right now too. The only way that an officer could enter into an area or search something without a warrant, there are exceptions to that. I know we didn't get into that, but I just want to just make sure everybody's aware of it, would be if there is an exigent circumstance, if there's an official, like an emergency, where there's a potential loss of life. It could also be a potential loss of evidence if they believe there's a crime afoot. Those are some exceptions to the warrant rule that would require us to have a warrant. So again, unless you're into some type of a heavy criminal activity, it's probably not going to apply to you, right? So it may be a moot issue. But again, there are emergency circumstances where an officer could do that. But again, I don't want to confuse it, but I just want to make sure that that there are some allowances according to law. So.
Thank you. All right, so some tips and strategies. So we're just going to go through them pretty quickly. Captain Rob, please feel free to speak up if anything, if you think of anything. So be sure to stay calm and polite. Things are always going to go easier for you if you're cooperative, even if you're not, going to cooperate necessarily with, something that an officer is telling you to do. If you're in the situation where you're able to not cooperate, always try to stay as calm as possible. Try to be as polite as possible with the officer that you're working with. As I said before, never lie or make false statements to law enforcement officials. Committing a crime is one thing, but then, lying or giving false statements, well, that's just another thing on top of the crime itself. So never lie, never make false statements to law enforcement or on government forms. Avoid sudden movements. As Captain Rob said, not only are officers there perhaps to investigate a situation, they also want to be safe themselves, for themselves. So again, avoid sudden movements. If you have to reach for something, let the officer know. In the example that Captain Rob gave of, reaching for your license, let them know you're reaching in your pocket to get the license. We advise you to carry proof of your immigration status on you. We have an entire webpage dedicated to travel with a particular part about domestic travel. And even for domestic travel, we always advise that you carry your I-20 or your DS 2019, which is your immigration document that ties you to the university, as well as your I-94 record, which will confirm your legal status in the United States as either an F1 or J1 student. Identify what agency is asking you for these documents. And if you're not sure that it's real or if it's just a scam, you can ask to see their badge. It's important to note just for you and your own records. Provide a US-based ID first, like your student ID or perhaps a state ID or an Indiana driver's license for those of you who may want to drive or are driving currently, only because that's going to be something that's more familiar to the officer, that they, it'll just be the most helpful to provide a US-based ID first before providing something like your passport. Be aware of your surroundings, the behavior of, the police presence of participants. Like I said, if you're in Chicago and there is a march happening and you decide that you want to join, but things are getting kind of rowdy, the participants or perhaps the relationship between the law enforcement and the participants is getting maybe a little bit chaotic, out of hand. Again, note that you getting in trouble at one of these events is going to be worse for you as an international student than it would be for, say, a US citizen. And so always be aware of your surroundings. Know when this is not a good place for you to be in. And that's really your responsibility.
And then the one thing I can add to that, if I can, Zena, is just make sure you're safe. That's the one thing. We want to make sure that you're safe at all times, whether or not you decide to participate in any kind of protest and demonstration or some type of situation, whether it's filming or anything, or just kind of questioning things. Just make sure you're physically safe, because that's what we want.
Yes, absolutely. And all of this information is here not only to prepare you and to make sure that you're aware, but also so that you can help keep yourself safe. That is the foremost priority. So then lastly on this list, knowing how to invoke your rights. As we mentioned, the scripts in the previous slide. Again, this is recorded, so you all will be able to review this recording and the slides as you like. So just to point out some Notre Dame resources, when you don't know who to call, Notre Dame Police Department is usually the best first point of contact. And actually the number is conveniently listed on the back of your student ID. So you have that handy. I also advise students, usually at your orientation, we tell you to just go ahead and save it in your phone so that you're not frantically, searching for your ID card if you're in a situation where you need assistance. And I mean that in like a severe situation, perhaps, but also if it's something like your bike is stolen, you've been locked out of your car, something that perhaps is a non-emergency, that would be a good place to start. So Notre Dame campus safety, Notre Dame Police Department's webpage, the ND Safe app. Captain Rob, did you want to talk anything about any of these resources?
Yeah, please. So the NDPD webpage has a lot of information regarding safety and what we do, what services we provide for the university here. Yeah, that's great. And there is also that your rights and responsibilities. And when you click on that, it's broken down into traffic stop behavior, pedestrian stops, searches, and some frequently asked questions. So a lot of good information there. Make sure you call us if you need us. That's the one thing I need to stress to you. A lot of good information here, safety wise. The one other thing would be the ND Safe app. It is a great tool that we created about a year ago. We are encouraging everybody to download it. There is something called ND Mobile, which is great for getting around campus and knowing campus resources. This is not ND Mobile. This is ND Safe. Everything in this app is regarding safety things on campus. There are you can use Safebound, which is our student-led escort, which operates every day of the week, Sunday through Wednesday night, 9 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. We'll get you to anywhere you need to get to on campus. We're not a rideshare service like Uber or Lyft. We don't take you off campus. We don't bring you on. But if you need to get from one area on campus to another, that is Safebound, and you can find that in that ND Safe app. Also, if you're working late at night, you're studying, you're working here on campus, we have what's called a virtual walk. There is a walk that you can initiate from your phone, from this app, that will allow an NDPD dispatcher to watch your geolocation getting on and off campus, basically. It is geofenced specifically right now for Notre Dame, St. Mary's, and Holy Cross campus. We don't go out into South Bend or St. Joe County area. But if you're getting around a campus, you don't want to use Safebound, you're not comfortable calling somebody else for help, or you don't have anybody else to walk with, our dispatcher can watch you. When you download the ND Safe app, it's going to initially ask you, do you want to share your location? I would suggest yes while using the app, because if anything ever happened to you while you were using the app, we can get to pinpoint location for you from about within 10 feet of you, of where your phone was last used or where it was showing. So it's a great safety information. Contrary to what some people may believe, we are not tracking you. We are not following you. We don't have time to do that, nor would we want to do that. It's just to show the geolocation when you're using the app services and the features. There's also something called a friend walk, where you can actually, when you use it, it'll send an email to one of your contacts, and you can pick and choose who that is, and they will accept it, and they're actually watching you get to where you need to. It's great safety. It's a great use of technology, and I encourage everybody to download that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then the final resource here is, of course, ISSA's webpage. We have a lot of really great information. Some of the things that I referenced are Driving in the US webpage. And then if you're wondering how to, access us under About, Contact, we have virtual appointments, we have walk-in hours, and then you can shoot us an email, give us a call, however is best for you to access our office. If you have questions, concerns, we're happy to either help advise you or point you in the right direction of who can. And then just some general resources that may be useful to you throughout your time in the United States. The American Civil Liberties Union has a lot of really great resources in terms of advocacy. What to do if you're stopped by the police or immigration agents or the FBI, resources like that. The National Lawyers Guild of Chicago, the American Immigration Lawyer Association. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we are not attorneys and this is not legal counsel. This is just to provide some preparation for you all, some general information. But if you are looking for an attorney or you do need some sort of legal counsel, if you're in that sort of situation, these would be some good resources. And if you were to email us at ISSA, we'd be happy to send you the links to these as well. The Indiana Public Defender Council, that would be something more local. And then, so that's the end of this formal presentation, but I do just have this slide to let you all know some of the other events that we've got for this fall semester at ISSA. So of course, the other Info Blitz events that are happening throughout the week. We are almost concluding, but we have one on cultural adjustment tomorrow, and then our exciting Football 101, which is our culminating event of the week tomorrow evening. Both of these events will have food. They are in person, not virtual. And then, of course, we have our fall 2023 trips that you all can sign up for. We go to the outlet mall to get some winter gear. We do a hike at Potato Creek. So anyway, some exciting things. And then just our general shopping shuttles for grocery stores, Walmart, Target, Meijer, that sort of thing. And then lastly, the final slide, we want your feedback. So if you have a second, I'll leave this up here. If you want to fill out our feedback form, this is the same form for all of the ISSA Info Blitz events. So if you've participated in other ones throughout the week, or if you plan to participate tomorrow, you'll have this exact same form to complete. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any suggestions you have for the Info Blitz for next year. You fill out the form, you'll be entered into a raffle for a very fancy Home Under the Dome t-shirt from ISSA. Thank you so much, Captain Rob, for joining us for the presentation and for all of your wonderful insight into this particular topic. And this video was recorded, so we will be posting this on our webpage as well in case you have questions. I actually see some in the chat. Oh, nope, no questions, just thank you. And so, of course, you're welcome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Zana. Appreciate it.
I have something to add real quick. We do have a Starbucks gift card as well for the
raffle. Yeah. Thank you so much, Elaine. Yes. So to bribe people to do our feedback form, we have a Starbucks gift card.
Feedback.
Wonderful. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.